Several documents released to a congressional hearing show that in 2005, General Motors decided not to fix a faulty ignition switch that would later be linked to the deaths of 13 people. Why? Because it would cost $1. According to a Reuters report, the U.S. Committee on Energy and Commerce released documents on Tuesday. During that hearing, lawmakers asked CEO of GM, Mary Barra, why GM failed to recall 2.6 million cars until more than a decade after it first noticed a switch problem that could, and what could this problem do, this faulty switch? It could cut off your engine, disable your airbags, power steering, and most importantly, your brakes. This faulty switch could cut your brakes. Disaster. Now, there's a Colorado congresswoman named Diana DeGette. Now, she cited a 2005 GM document that she said showed a cost of around 57 cents per fix. Now, the document was unavailable, so we can't really corroborate that. So instead, Reuters had obtained a series of emails between GM engineers. Now, these GM engineers were debating whether or not the switch should be changed. One of them, John Hendler, had cited the cost as being too high, 90 cents per switch per car, and tooling costs of $400,000. Now, that $400,000 could be amortized over the next few years. So it wasn't like an upfront $400,000 cost. According to the emails from 2005, Hendler said that the cars using this defective switch will continue using it until, quote, the piece cost can be eliminated or significantly reduced. Now, this piece was made by Delphi, and they had warned GM back in 2002 that the switch didn't meet even GM's performance specs. Hey, we gave you this switch and it was faulty. You better not use it. GM says, oh, fuck it, we're going to use it. Why not? Now, in 2006, they finally replaced that part, but now GM is finally recalling over 1 million cars that are still on the road that may have this faulty part. Now, I'm going to turn it over to you guys. What do you guys think about this story?
Like, they're saying that the cost of, kind of replacing all of these switches, and they should probably be called kill switches, as you said, it's, resulted in, a number of deaths over the last decade. But, they're saying it would cost $400,000 or whatever to totally fix it. It's probably going to cost, more. There's that kind of onset cost that will go across the years, as you said, but then there's a whole kind of public kind of disaster, and they're going to have to kind of pay to improve their image again. Then it's going to be the cost of actually bringing all the cars in and fixing it. So the cost is going to be more. But like you said, for a company like GM that kind of makes millions in profits, they're putting people's lives at risk. If it's cutting the brakes, if it's cutting your engine, it's a kill switch essentially. And they should have done, as soon as they realised there was a problem that could have led to their customers dying, they should have gone in and fixed it. It's just completely unacceptable.
This shows how poorly GM. I don't know. I don't want to be Libby McLiberson here. So I don't know if this shows either A, just how poorly GM was run before the government bailed it out and made it restructure, or B, if this is just one further indictment of American corporate culture. But it's a no-brainer that the recall that is going to happen eventually is going to cost so much more than fixing this problem during production. And they chose to not fix it during production and eat the loss on the recall. Not to mention what Stephen talked about, the whole PR nightmare this is. Just from a purely dollars and cents standpoint, it's going to cost you more money to do the recall. And so I think kind of maybe the reason why that happens is because these CEOs and stuff like that, they know they're only going to be in this job for a few years, and all they're interested about is getting that good balance sheet for a year or two, getting their big bonus, getting out, and they leave this broken company behind. I don't know if that's exactly what happened. I mean, well, obviously a broken GM was left behind because of these years. I think that's more behavior of bankers that I just described. I guess maybe it's applied to actual, goods and services corporations too. GM was just run so poorly, and this is an example of it. And hey, thank God for the bailout, man, because it's a better company now. Like, this kind of stuff isn't happening anymore, at least as far as we know. And I'll eat my words if we find out that that's not the case. But yay for big government coming in and telling a business how to run itself, and not only saving an industry but stopping people from dying.
Yeah, maybe they act like assholes because they know that they're going to get bailed out. Because if you do this and you think your company could go out of business, you might be less nice or less like a piece of crap. But as the only person who drives a GM, well, I drive a Chevy, which is made by General Motors. I thought that was
to drive a GM.
Whatever. I thought that was just a thing. Sometimes when I parallel park, my power steering just goes off, and it kind of sucks a lot. But yeah. So. Basically, this is like the dumbest corporation. I don't want to say the dumbest corporation ever because that's a hyperbole. But if you do the recall yourself and say, we found this glitch and bring them in, you're not going to get that much of a backlash. If somebody finds it a decade later, it's going to be 1,000 times worse for you. And the government bought this company in like 2008, 2009, and it's 2014. So yay for big government for a 5-year wait.
Yeah, well, I mean, you say it's going to be worse for them, if they let this drag on. But kind of who is them? I mean, no doubt the CEOs, when they first discovered that there was this fault and it was going to cost, $400,000 plus, PR costs and what have you. Were those CEOs thinking, I'm still going to be here in 10 years' time, or were they probably thinking, again, just speculation? They were no doubt thinking, well, we can probably hush this up for a couple of years until at least I've left the company. And then it's not my problem. And that means I'm not going to have any bad kind of numbers on my books as a CEO, and it's going to enhance my reputation. So they probably just thought, I can sit on this problem, I'll let the next guy deal with it. So it wasn't going to be the CEO at the time's problem. He knew he could just load it off onto the next guy. That's one of the reasons why I reckon it wasn't dealt with.
Exactly.
Well, look, I'll kind of take it into a little bit of a different direction and just... I gotta say, stories like this, it's kind of when I laugh when people say, when you hear corporations are people, right? Because it's obvious that they're not. They're not moral, especially. And their primary goal, like GM, is to save as much money and make as much money as they can at any cost. And this is an example of them doing just that, of that directive, that make money at all costs directive, just playing out. It's also a perfect example of why corporations shouldn't regulate themselves, perhaps. And I know this doesn't. I don't know if this has a whole lot to do with, a specific regulation that could have stopped this. But nonetheless, they knew that switch was defective. It's off the engines and disable your airbags, power steering, and your brakes, and they let it go literally to save less than $1. Is that moral? 13 people died in relation to this defect for what it cost.
Yeah, it's definitely not an argument. I don't think you can extrapolate that out and say it's an argument for government regulation, but it's certainly an argument that industry regulation doesn't work, because Delphi came to GM and said, "Hey, don't use this part we made. It's bad." They tried to self-regulate, and GM said, "No, we're going to keep using it." And I do want to, just for our more mechanically minded viewers who might think we sound like idiots right now, it's not that this ignition switch breaking targets your brakes or your power steering. It's that your brakes run off of a vacuum that only is created whenever the engine's running. Your power steering runs off of a belt that's powered by the crankshaft when your engine's running. So when this ignition switch falls out of place and the engine shuts off, you lose all of those things because they're assisted by the function of the engine. So that's what's going on here.
Right.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, I think one of the incredible things as well here is that, saying kind of this company Delphi that makes a switch, they came to GM and said, look, this switch doesn't even meet your own standards. And the fact that GM was setting their own standards, so they're probably going to be quite low standards anyway, and even this switch didn't meet their exceedingly low standards, and they still thought, fuck it, it'll be fine. And it ended up killing 13 people. Amazingly.
Do that shit all the time.
I don't see what a magic regulator would have done to solve this problem. I mean, we gave them like $50 billion, and they and they're allowed to keep $18 billion that they're never going to pay us back.
Hey, and the problem went away. Isn't that crazy?
to really put the blame, I think the blame is more on corporate culture, to be honest with you. And corporate culture has this pressure on short-term sales, right? What can get us the highest return in the shortest amount of time? And you've got that pressure to please shareholders and investors, right? And that's sort of the problem. You've got all that pressure and that will lead you to cut costs and cut corners. I've seen it. I've worked in places where they would cut a lot of costs. They would send out defective parts. And I know it's just an anecdote, but I've worked in a lot of different places that did manufacturing for car parts. And I can tell you, I've seen a lot of that happen. A lot of cutting corners, a lot of, well, yeah, this doesn't mean your standards, but you're going to buy it anyway.
Yeah, and
we're selling it cheaper.
I sold a lot of broken remote control helicopters, so I know Jeff's right about that.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily corporate nature. It's just human nature. It's kind of we'll cross that bridge when we come to it sort of problem. No matter what job you're doing, whether it's in politics or if you're at kind of university writing essays and you've got a deadline coming and go, oh, well, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. We do just tend to live in the here and now. We don't think kind of 10, 20, 30 years down the line. Same with climate change. It's part of human culture, and this is why you do need some people in government, I feel, to step in and say, no, you can't just look at the short term. Let's try and think of the long term as well.